All right, so I think we should be ready to go. So let's kick off this webinar. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to our new episode of this webinar series, Atlassian Governance in the Cloud, where I'm Miguel. I'm accompanied here with Daniel as well. We're from Service Rocket. We'll be talking a little bit about this is a broad topic, honestly, but we could speak about this all day. But we don't only want to talk about theory about this, and we want to talk about as well best practices and a couple of things that you can probably bring back as well and implement yourself into your own instance. So we want to discuss a little bit of what is governance, a maturity model that we've come up as well that we have implemented with our customers over the time, and as well some best practices and some things that we can share that we have learned over the time that we have worked as solution partners for the Atlassian ecosystem. So pretty much who we are a trusted provider of tech-enabled services with over 20 years experience as an Atlassian partner. We bring these, honestly, it's 20 years of experience. We were the first solution partner. We were born right alongside Atlassian over in Sydney, Australia. And companies, they just turn to us again and again to solve their most pressing needs. We help them accelerate their growth and reduce complexity. We are truly a global company. Rocketeers collaborate across 5 continents and as many time zones as possible, honestly. Many Rocketeers are Atlassian certified. We have Rocketeers that have decades of tenure with us as well. We share deep knowledge of the Atlassian ecosystem and anything that is in between it. We have 11 Atlassian certified experts, including myself and Daniel. We have 24/7 customer support. We follow the sun. So no matter where you are located in the world, we are going to be able to help you out and provide support over your tools and your instances, be it server, DC, and on-prem. We are an Atlassian Platinum Solution Partner. We meet Atlassian's highest training criteria, and we also meet the highest security standards as well, so we keep your data safe. We are cloud and ITSM specialized, so that means that we are experts in both performing migrations, server to DC into a cloud, be it that way, consolidations of all sorts, any type of migration you can think about. But we are also experts in implementing and keep maintaining and running ITSM tools as well by way of Jira Service Management, Ops, Genie, and all these kind of tools that are interconnected. Our commitment is to be the single most reliable partner in the acceleration of your growth, and we're here to help you out. So welcome again to this webinar. Once again, if you have any questions, you can raise them up into your Q&A. Our agenda for today, we're going to be talking a little bit about governance in the Jira Cloud, what that concept is, and how you can probably measure it, and some best practices into it. Security, efficiency, compliance, all of that ties into governance. And let's talk about it as well as key components of governance practices, which are policies, processes, and tools. And in the end, we would open up to a Q&A section with you as well to answer any questions or any comments that you may have. I'm Miguel. I am a solution architect. I come from the technical side of things, so I have years of experience with the Atlassian stack. I specialize both on DC, on-prem, and cloud instances. I have done heaps of migrations, implementations, optimizations, audits, and anything in between. I serve as a trusted advisor to our customers. I'm always happy to help, always happy to lend an ear and see how we can help you out. And accompanying us today is Daniel, our director of architecture, and take it on.
Yeah, sorry. So not Peter, as you can see. Peter had a conflicting appointment, and so I'm filling in. But yeah, I work alongside with Miguel and the team, and really our role is to partner with our customers and help solve all kinds of problems. Governance is one of the ones we tackle on a regular basis, so that's why I'm here speaking on this topic today with you. All right, so the intro to governance. I'm going to give a broad view of what it means. And first of all, I'd like to, if you go to the next slide, just quick poll. I just want to get a sense of the types of roles we have on the call. If you're in DevOps or you're actually doing service management, you're doing enterprise service management stuff, or you're working on some work management, basically outside of tech, outside of IT, typical sort of service management stuff. We see more and more, obviously, the Atlassian stack being used in sort of business problems as opposed to technical stuff, which is like DevOps and things like that. So I'd love to see just a quick response from everybody. If you could just give me a sense of the types of roles you're in. That way I get a sense of the types of day-to-day interactions you're having with the platform.
Yeah, and we're seeing already some answers coming in. So we're seeing folks from the IT space, from the enterprise service management as well coming in. We're seeing a couple of DevOps as well. So pretty much all over the board.
All right. Excellent. Thank you.
And yeah, so ITSM is taking the lead right now. So welcome all. Happy to discuss, and we're going to keep this in mind as well for this presentation.
All right. Next slide, please, Miguel. All right. So what is governance? You hear this a lot. Governance, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of basically everybody can come at it from different angles, and sometimes it depends on your role, the types of functions you do. So we're going to just kind of quickly run through with what we define as governance and how it can map and apply to the platform and the stack in general, in the Atlassian stack. So governance is basically a set of structures, processes, and policies through which you're going to use the software, and think of it as the rule set by which you're going to deliver and solve some of these problems, business value, how risk is mitigated, and how you basically use all of that in the context of creating efficient operations, responding to customers timely, SLAs, all that good stuff. All of that is part of like a governance structure. If you go to the next slide. So basically, we break this up into 5 elements when we talk about Jira governance in particular, right? So it starts with the identity and access management. This I'll go through those in a little bit more detail later, but it talks about basically this area is all focusing on the user access. So who can see what, and what are the roles and permissions that users get mapped to as they come into the stack. The next pillar is basically workflow and project management. So this is the idea that you have a standard set of workflows, templates, issue types. In the old days, if you had small instances or kind of ungoverned instances, you'd see a lot of workflows, a lot of different templates, and users would just kind of go off and create their own thing, which is great. You get a lot of flexibility, but it makes governance really hard because you don't understand who's doing what permissions are being enforced. And it makes it really hard to report and do analytical sort of what if, or just trying to understand who's got access to what. So if you standardize all these things, it makes that part a lot better to govern. The next tier is data security and compliance. This is talking about the sort of the what's required with the storage of data, encryption, logs, traceability, backups, retention policies. Do you work in a regulatory environment where everything needs to be captured, or you don't really need to worry about so much about that stuff? It all depends on what you're working on and what you need to adhere to. But generally, you should be thinking about some sort of structure so that you can have a compliance model that can be sort of tailored to your needs now, but also in the future. You may not need heavy compliance right now, but you may a couple months from now, if you start working with the government, for instance, they're going to impose a governance and compliance structure on you that you better adhere to. So better to be prepared and thinking about that when you can early on. And then, of course, the reporting and monitoring. That's talking about tracking, the Jira usage itself, sort of identifying if there's any bottlenecks in the responsiveness of the platform. Are there API requests and webhooks coming in that you may not be aware of? Are there like thousands of things coming in? Worked with customers in the past that they had no idea that there were some webhooks that were implemented by certain users, and they were getting all kinds of traffic coming in, and they weren't sure why. So if you have a governance framework, you can actually not control, but at least be aware of. And if you do want to control, you can, but at least be aware of what's happening in the platform. This is where monitoring and reporting, this pillar comes in. And then, of course, change management. We all know about this. We all love to hate this aspect of working in technology, but it really is important when you're talking about processes for approving, tracking, and implementing changes. So just making sure that changes are aware of, people are aware of those changes, what the possible impacts are, and ensuring you have like rollback capabilities, things like that. That's all comes into the change management pillar. Next slide, please, Mika. All right, so one of the things is we like to talk to our customers about is really understanding what the maturity model that they think they have with regards to governance. So there is what you think you have and what you actually have. And a lot of times, like we find that customers think they have a certain maturity model, but it turns out they don't necessarily have that fully implemented, or it may be implemented by one team or one department, but another department does nothing or does something completely different than the other team. So if you go to the next slide, I'll show you what we define as the maturity model. It's pretty standard though. You have a level 1 all the way to level 5, where you have like an initial stage. It's uncontrolled, very little oversight. Users get to do essentially whatever they want. We don't see this too much anymore. Used to see it in the early days in startups and things like that. You'll see kind of like this where you have a lot of power users who can do a lot of things in the stack, a lot of integrations without any control. So luckily, we don't see that much anymore. Where we see most of our customers, they range between level 2 and level 4. You have some basic controls at level 2, some user access management, some basic workflows, some basic templates. So we see a lot of customers in this stage of the life cycle of the maturity model. And then you start getting a little bit more refined, and you have some policies and procedures to guide how the platforms are being used. You have automation, you have onboarding, offboarding sort of policies, for instance. Templates are governed and controlled, workflows are governed and controlled. And then you get into level 4, where you have a lot of management, a lot of governance, good reporting and monitoring, and basically change management comes into the picture here as well. So you're trying to, you have a bigger organization with a lot of stakeholders. You want to be somewhere between a level 3 and a level 5, somewhere to fit in there. So we typically see customers who are a mix of some of these, and depending on the area, different teams, all the way to level 5, where you have a very strict focus on continuous improvement with automation, analytics. You have automated response to requests. You have self-service capabilities. That's when you're really, really focusing on scale and governance to help the scalability as well. So not a poll or anything, but I'd be curious if you just post in the Q&A where you think you are in that. As I just go through it, I'll just have a look as we're talking through the different points with Miguel and I. Just curious what you think your organization is, or your customers, if you're working with customers, what you typically see if you're seeing level 3, 4, 5s, or a 1. But yeah, just drop a note. I'd be curious to see what you're seeing in the real world versus what we're seeing. And next slide. All right, so Miguel, you can take it from here.
Yeah, so going back to those maturity models, right, where we have there is that provides us an initial assessment, and that is something that we will run with you in a workshop as well as something that you can run yourself as an assessment, is to a little bit understand what's your current state, for you then to understand and go into a little bit deeper of your configurations and understand a little bit more of the technical underside of everything that we're discussing about right now, to determine what's your future state in this as well. So when we talk about these and we talk about the governance levels, obviously they're not clear cut for everything. There are a lot of moving pieces for all of these, but it is going to allow you to get an idea of where you're at and where you want to be and what's kind of missing in between of those, and have that gap and understand it and see what you can do as an admin and as a person that is administering these Atlassian products, not only Jira, but you can talk about Confluence as well, Offsuite, and everything in between, towards that proper optimized governance model that's continually improving, right? So let's talk a little bit about common challenges, solutions. Once again, governance is a very broad topic. There's a lot of things that are inside of this, and it involves a pretty robust and capable team to keep this up to date and maintain it. But let's talk about the commonalities of it. So first off, going into cloud, you've migrated to cloud, probably. You probably recently you have just moved in. You're planning to do so soon, probably as well, given the server end of life and data center. You're looking around, and if you're already in cloud, there seems to be a lot of difference in how it looks. It feels, all the features versus your old data center. You probably love your data center instance. You probably were very attached to it. With cloud, now you look at it, it's cleaner. The UI is much more polished. It's more user friendly. There's new features. We got Atlassian Intelligence has been rolled out right now. So your admin team now probably has a little bit more free time on their hands from not having to deal with upgrades and performance issues, assuming, well, it's not completely free, that's a stretch, but gone are the old ways of working, right? So no more painful upgrades over long weekends, like on a Friday evening, getting an email from Atlassian, from a security advisor, some CVE came up, you have to do like an emergency patch over the weekend. That is no longer the case. That has been taken care of. No more backups. If the backup failed, you have to go back and kick it off again. None of that is longer the case in the cloud instances. So what should you have? Essentially, you now have hopefully more money for not having to manage your on-premise infrastructure. You don't have to mess with databases, servers, all these kind of things. You probably have a little bit more time not having to deal with DC-related issues. Nothing that is the underlying tech. Either you have to upgrade Java or your database, none of these kind of things. And you probably have more control from a more streamlined architecture, right? So we'll discuss this a little bit more detail in a bit, but all this allows us to dedicate time in setting up a mature and functional governance structure in your Elastic Cloud tool. So we are effectively shifting the focus of the IT team to plan ahead and look into the future and understand what you can set in place with the tooling you have right now to ensure proper usage, to streamline it and optimize it for the end users as well, to enrich their experiences within these tools. So it's important to go back, let's take a step back and let's talk about governance again and why you need to implement it into your organization. So cloud governance for Jira refers to the policies, the processes, and the tools, both third-party and that are incorporated into the Atlassian stack to control your instances. This ensures secure, efficient, and compliant use of the Jira data and its functionalities. This is especially important if you work in a regulated industry, or if you handle information like personal identifiable information, passwords, these kind of things that may be regulated or fall within something then, ISO or SOC 2, compliance, GDPR, all these kind of things as well, you need to keep an eye on as well and set up these governance policies as well to keep up to date with these, as Daniel mentioned in the past. So common challenge number one, access control. Let's talk about IAM. As the name says, this is a very badly configured permission scheme. Anybody have an idea? You can answer it, and you could put it in the Q&A as well. Why this permission scheme is far from ideal? I'm gonna give it a little bit of a second. So this is a permission scheme that you would attach into a Jira project. And one of the things that you see here is that you would assign this to either roles, groups, single users. You have a lot of flexibility in this. It allows you a lot of granularity, but since it gives you that power, it allows you to probably set it up in a way that is not the best for your admins, and it's going to give them a lot of headaches, right? So yeah, and I'm seeing a comment right now, like the first one, you see that this one is a big no-no. Any logged in user, on top of that, is attached to the administered project. So anybody is just a project admin right now in any project that is attached to this permission scheme. That is far from ideal. You're granting elevated privileges to pretty much anybody that has access to the instances, instead of having a second layer at the project level to filter everybody to be able to only access what they need to, that principle of least privilege, right? And then the second one that you have as well is the browse projects. It's been assigned to single users. This is also something that shouldn't be the case. Sometimes you need to do this for troubleshooting, but the idea is that you don't blanket add everybody as a single user into these permission schemes, because that gives a lot of overhead and excessive work towards your Jira admins, because then they have to go back and kind of understand where everybody's getting the permission schemes. There's a permission helper that's going to help you out in that, but you shouldn't need to resort to those tools. You should be able to understand that either you're using groups or roles that are assigned to the projects to grant access to everybody into the project level. There should be a second layer, right, before you're able to view the data. You should be able to have that layer of access into Jira, the product access, and then underlying it by way of permission schemes and issue security level and all these kind of artifacts, be able to have the second checkpoint in which users are only able to access what they need to, instead of having them to have the possibility of accessing projects they may not need to be looking into, right? So second challenge, custom fields. This probably rings a bell. with a lot of folks, just having just a bunch of custom fields, have this sprawl of nebulous kind of probably related, probably unrelated custom fields that are the same type. They have like a similar name, you know, like system change or system number or these kind of things as well. This is very common to see. We see this a lot in custom and cloud migrations as well, because this is something that we need to clean up and merge them, because it's a great opportunity to set this up. Right. So when you look into custom fields, another thing that you need to do is understand that you don't need to blanket create custom fields when anybody comes in and asks for it. That is something that is very common, and it's kind of that stance or that kind of reactive stance into managing in a Jira instance, in which you just kind of grant everything without checking what's already capable, what the instance is capable of right now and what's configured into it. So you have this bunch of custom fields, all of them are called system, all of them are select lists. They probably have a similar use case without even looking into them. They probably have different options because they're select lists. But since they're select lists, right, and they're the same type, you can leverage context in this case, right, and merge them all into single custom field with several contexts. This is going to reduce the clutter. It's going to ensure a higher maintainability of these, and it's going to ease out the process of having an oversight into these custom fields, how they're being used, and then how they should be maintained moving forward, right? So merging custom fields, right? Consolidating them. What's the purpose of this? You know, so this allows you to first gives you reusability. There's probably a lot of fields that you may be able to reuse in different contexts, in different projects, and then it allows auditability as well. It allows you to understand why you're using this, who implemented this, and this ties into change management, which we're going to discuss into a little bit, is who implemented it, why it was implemented, and the reasons for it, right? So this is something you can easily tie into a change management process and have this in the front end kind of look into what custom fields you have, understand what they're being used for, and if these are valid use cases, if these are valid for the use case that you're looking for, instead of having to create another custom field that you need to maintain and it's probably add into your sprawl. So policies and processes. Let's talk about policies first. They usually go in hand, both of them. Policies lay out the rules and processes lay out the how-to. Right? This is something you would have documented in your knowledge base as part of a governance section, and ideally have set up a periodic review of checkpoints for at least to keep them up to date and relevant to your organization's need and what you're practicing out of. So the policies are pretty much what you need to achieve within your instance. They define the scope and the purpose. They define the roles and responsibilities of the teams that are involved in these, and it defines pretty much the statements, what you're expecting out of this policy. This is an example of a policy that has been written out in Confluence, right? Confluence is a great place to use as a knowledge base for these kind of purposes. Here, we're seeing the who. We're seeing what team is involved into this policy and what their responsibilities are within this context. In this case, being user access, we're still talking about IAM. So we see all of these are displayed out, and then we can see the statements here, like the why. Why is this necessary, and what are the rules or the guardrails that are set in place for this policy to be airtight? So all of this is something that you would document into a governance space. For example, you can have Confluence, you create a governance space for this, and you maintain it, right? You can have a periodic review of it every 6 months, every couple of months to look into it and understand if it's still valid, if it's still up to date, if it needs any sorts of changes, right? And then at the back end of that would be the process, which is the specific steps within the tools and within the teams that need to be taken in a certain context for these policies to kind of come to life inside of your instance. This is a change management process, right? This is a very common one, a kind of a boilerplate one that is set up when you need to establish this within an organization. And I want to discuss of an example of, for example, a customer that has, going back to the custom fields, needs a change management process for administering custom fields, right? We have a customer that we work with them and we implement and help them out with this process in which you would need to raise a request in a customer portal if you needed a new custom field. But before you were able to do that, you would be pointed towards a Confluence page that would document all the custom fields that were implemented already in the system. So you could peruse that and kind of go into the names and understand, look at the types and see if something would ring a bell and if something would be useful for you. That would ease out the implementation, and the Jira admin would just need to add that custom field into the screens, the related screens for the project, and they would be set. If nothing was there, then you could still be able to ask for the custom field, but then you would need to justify it, right? And all of that would go into the change management process and that documentation for future reference. So if, for example, the Jira admin eventually leaves the company and a new Jira admin comes in, that person can still reference that change management log and understand what you have and why it was implemented and why it should still be there moving forward. Now, let's talk a little bit about tools, right? So all these processes, policies, they're enforced by way of different tools that you can have in your instance. The Atlassian Cloud Suite comes with a lot of these tools that allows you to enforce a lot of these. We already talked about permissions. User roles are a crucial component of this as well. We ensure that only authorized users can make changes to processes and workflows. In this case, when we need to define this IAM process, these are crucial to come into play, and they are crucial to be configured in a way in which they make sense to your organization. Generally, they're set out by teams, the way that teams work in projects, and then you will grant access to them depending on where they need to work at and when. You got project templates, workflows. Project templates, in this case, they're not the same as in data center because you can make custom project templates, but you can definitely leverage automation rules to create certain templates by your way and then have these standardized across your instance as well. There is obviously a degree into this, and not everybody and not every team is going to work the same, but there is a case for having standardized workflows and having certain standardized artifacts into your project as well, because this allows you to ensure a higher degree of maintainability, and it's going to give you an ease of use for users as well. So for example, if you have a user that has to switch context between different projects, it is always going to be easier if everything follows a very either the same or a very similar workflow and a similar process that has the same issue types in the backend. This is obviously not a requisite, but it's something that you should kind of aim for to have a certain percentage or degree of this inside of your instance. We have issue security, and then we have what used to be Atlassian Access, which is now Atlassian Guard. That gives you a lot of capabilities for logging and reporting and access controls as well that you can enforce into your end users. And then third-party tools, there's a plethora of them. There's a lot of apps that allow you to do several things on top of the out-of-the-box functionalities. I have retention management tools, you have GRC workflow tools, approval tools. And for example, an example of this one is the Secure Notes for JSM. This is a new app that was rolled out by Service Rocket a couple of months ago, and it allows you to configure a field into the issue view screen for issues, especially in JSM, right, that you can share pieces of information within this field that is encrypted only to certain authorized users that you specify for that field to be viewed. So you can share passwords or PII, these kind of things in a sandbox way, right, in which you can ensure that this data is not being leaked out into people that shouldn't be looking into it, and it's only being shared to relevant people or customers. This is something that is very important, and we've seen a lot of adoption over the months with this one as well. And then talking about that standardization, let's discuss a little bit about issue types, right? And this is something as well that we can talk about as a process or as a tool, that when you have different issue types, you can notice that, and this is something that should be paid to a special attention from admins when projects are created, that when you create a project, it creates an issue type scheme for that project. So you're going to have like a sprawl of these. And I guarantee you, if you go into it and check out the issue type schemes of your instance, there's going to be a lot of them over there. And they are probably going to be very similar to these ones as you hear. They're pretty much just the same, right? And this service issue type, whereas it is different and it has different issue types, is very similar to these ones as well. So they have very small differences between them, and they just add up on top to artifacts that are probably not necessary in your case, that could be consolidated, right? So a proposal here, and a quick one towards this objective, is to simply take all of these and associate them to one issue type scheme and get rid of a couple of these, right? This is something that you can do to reduce that overhead that is going to be there and is inherent to these tools when you try to understand everything that is happening within your project and all these kind of artifacts that are attached to it. So it's not usually as straightforward as this, right? It's not simple as you look into the issue type screens and they're all identical, but it's important to note that sometimes the different schemes will have some differences between them, but that doesn't mean that they cannot be remapped. It's good to gather, all the stakeholders and discuss with them after you have these workshops in which you discover all of these instances of duplicate artifacts, duplicate schemes, and kind of sit down with them and understand what their use cases are and what they're looking for out of the tool, right? And sometimes you notice that by having that conversation, you can also understand the need for the previous way of working, and then how they could adapt to the new, for example, changes in the issue type schemes, right? That is something that is something that we've noticed, in the past engagements is it's not only talking about the technical details and what's going to change in the underlying screens and schemes, it's also about the folks that are actually working into this and how they're using this and how we can adapt to them for them to best perform their work. So scheme remapping, right? It reduces admin overhead. It allows us to rediscover the whys, as I mentioned, like as to why this is being performed this way. Maybe it can be done in a better optimized way in another form of function, and it gives you ease of use. Once again, that standardizing is something that is going to be rippling across your instance, and it's going to allow you a lot of seamless cross-functional work between your teams as well, right? So once again, all of this there's a lot to look into this, and something I would recommend, especially for Jira admins, is to look into Atlassian University's trainings. There's a lot of training courses that's going to allow you to look into this and understand a little bit more of what's happening in the back end, what you can change and what you can impact within your instance to streamline these kind of processes and this work, right? These trainings will help them to understand key concepts and best practices that will help with the overall governance of the system, especially Jira administration, which is a build-up to that ACP 120 certification, which is very useful for Jira admins to have, especially as well as ACP 620, which is Jira project administration, right? In this case, when you leverage these training as well, and you can reach out to your end users as well for certain training, and for example, like Jira fundamentals and the Confluence foundations, you're going to allow these tools to be used to their full potential, right? Users will become more familiar with the use of specific page macros, for example, like blueprints, gadgets, reporting, all these kind of deeper functionalities, and all of these will be leveraged out of the training. We at Service Rocket are definitely true believers and firm believers that training is a key component of everything that we do. It's not only the case of having to come in and implement, for example, a JSM or a Jira project or a whole instance or just migrate it over and be done with it. We have to include training as well for the end users, for everybody to understand what the potential and the options that you have with these tools so you can leverage and make the best out of it, right? This is a huge investment by your company, and we want to make sure that you're making the best out of it as well. So that is why with a lot of our services, we include free training that are very similar in the content to these Atlassian generated courses to ensure that end users and power users and admins are in the know of everything that they need to do so they can work out with these tools. Right. And also we have assessments, right? So we at Service Rocket as well, we can help you with that governance, right? We can help you with understanding what's your current state and then what's your future state. So there's a lot of stuff that you can look into. Once again, I didn't touch on all the 5 topics that we have identified for governance. So I talked about IAM, I talked about workflow and process management, and I talked about change management. There were some missing pieces here and there. So that's why we have these governance workshops in which we go in and help you understand what you have. We would love to have a look at your instance. We have access into it, look into the way you're provisioning users. Look into the way that product access is being granted into your users, and then see the underlying permission schemes and roles that are configured into Jira as well, and the space permission schemes and conflicts, right? We ensure that security and auditability. We have user adoption workshops as well to create training plans, for all the teams that are probably being rolled in on a frequent basis into Jira from other tools, for example. We also ensure or help you out in these workshops with project configuration and with data integrity and reporting and all these sorts of things. We pretty much adapt to what you're looking for. Every organization is always kind of looking into something different for their instance and have a different priority. And that's when we bring in one of our specialists that are specialists in one of these areas, to be redundant, and can help you out with one of these. So this is just an overall glance at governance and how you can best ensure that this is taken care of in cloud. There are a plethora of tools that you can use, right, in the cloud to configure this and set up these processes for you to ensure this is functioning properly and the tool is being used properly. So I think there could be a lot of questions and answers. Let's open this up. Daniel, I don't know if you have any comments, anybody from the audience as well. If you have any questions, we would love to hear you and have a conversation with you for the remaining minutes that we have left here.
Yeah, thanks, Miguel. I do want to just say that there was a question posted about the recording being shared. Yes, this will go out. I think they get posted on YouTube, Vasu, as you posted, and that'll be shared in the follow-up email.
All right, so we see Vasu raised his hand. Go ahead. Welcome, Vasu.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Oh, okay. So the whole, so I've been a part of somewhere where the access controls were really messed up, and so your whole presentation was absolutely awesome. Why it's important. I'm a compliance specialist, been in sanctions and also been administrator of several systems. So I just wanted to compliment that that's why I wanted to recording to review again, because you had explained it so well why the access controls are important and the retention policies, which are not really recognized by a lot of the the upper level. So thank you.
Well, thanks for the comment, Vasu. That's appreciated. Yeah, we do. We actually do a lot of work with some large banks, and some of these things are really important and mandatory actually from their compliance and security teams. So yeah, again, it depends on the industry, and surprisingly, some people, some customers who are using Atlassian, they start using it, kind of quick and easy. They just kind of leave it open, and then they start working with, say, a government customer who mandates all kinds of extra levels of controls and compliance that they weren't used to having. And so we have to go in there and sort of educate them on how to set that up, how to think about the stuff up front. If you think about it up front, it actually is a fairly easy thing to manage. But if you leave it for later and you have to go back in and retrofit, that's where it becomes a bigger task to do. So my suggestion is, even though you think you may not need this kind of stuff up front, it's actually easier to do it up front than go back later and do it. So try and do it up front.
Very true. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And to add on top of that, that is something that is very commonly uncovered, in which you have an organization that has this very tight security requirements. And overall, in their overarching tooling and instances, their infrastructure, they do have it. But when you look into Jira, you uncover that it's not as properly configured as it should be. The good thing and the good news is that Jira has that capability built in that allows you for that granularity and to specify exactly what you need to get out of that tool, permissions-wise, for user access. So that's a good part, and it allows you for an ease of design and to maintain it properly as well.
Correct.
And Kevin, to answer your question, actually, there's, I got some good news for you as well, because there was an announcement in Team, that conference they made in a couple of weeks ago in Vegas, that all the courses in the Atlassian University, a couple of them, they used to be paid. Now they're all free of charge. So feel free to go into there. You can search up the Atlassian University and just, anything that raises your interest, you can just definitely go into it and take some time out of the day and look into it. There are very short courses, and then there are larger kind of like courses that have a smaller type of piecemeal approaches towards it. For example, Jira Administration 1 is a fairly large one, but you can look into like the reporting and the dashboards course that would take a couple of hours out of the day. So there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to see over there as well, and definitely recommend it. We as Service Rocket Rocketeers and consultants, we definitely go through a lot of these and are certified out of these. So we can attest to the quality of these. All right, so we have another question. Where can we find more information or contact if more questions come up? That is a great question. So you can visit our website at servicerocket.com, and you can also send us out an email. So here's Daniel's and here's my own Service Rocket emails. You can reach out to us as well if you have further questions. We would be happy to help out and hear out anything that you need. Are there only on-demand trainings available from the Atlassian University? Yes, there is. However, you have the option to have these delivered either via remote, like for example, in a Zoom call like this one, or on-prem on your organization or your company's dependencies if you need it so. That is under the ATP program, as Atlassian calls it, which is the Atlassian Training Partners. We are ATP certified. I myself am, Daniel, I think as well. So we can also deliver these training courses to you wherever you need them to as well. So we can help you out with that as well if you need that to be in person, if you need something more personalized. And we have a catalog of training sessions as well that were developed by ourselves inside of Service Rocket. So that is something that we can definitely help you out with as well.
What has been your biggest challenge, Vasu? And just asked.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge I'd say is large organizations with a large I mean, from my perspective, Miguel may have a different one. For mine, it's retrofitting user roles and permissions, and that is like the biggest challenge because it's not just like the Atlassian stack. I mean, you typically have some sort of user system like an AD of some sort. You have to get that stuff right first at the source. If you don't have that right at the source, whatever you try and use that data inside of the Atlassian stack, you're gonna have. It's like the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. That applies here too, and then sort of modeling that. And sometimes, you're dealing with change in terms of what people can do and can't do all of a sudden after that. So they used to be able to do things in the stack, create new projects whenever they wanted, create new custom fields, do new workflows. And now you're like instituting some control and change management over that. So there's like change management, organizational change challenges. But yeah, organizing your roles and permissions is like by far the hardest challenge we run into, and access control lists around that, and then all the change management that comes with that. But Miguel, maybe you have your own take on that.
Yeah, no, and I agree 100% with that. Definitely. Like, for example, we worked on last year on a very large migration and consolidation effort. So it was 15 instances, I believe. A lot of them were server, but there was some data center in between. There were some cloud instances as well. So we needed to merge all of those into a single cloud instance. So you can imagine, there was a varying degree of maturity for all of these. There were different ways of working each team because these were all acquired brands that got into a single brand into the end. And they had, different workflows. They had different degrees of integrations, automations, like plugins. Permission schemes were completely different priorities. Imagine the mess, because now a couple of months ago, the priority schemes just rolled out for cloud, but it didn't just be the case last year, right? There were no priority schemes in cloud. We needed to figure out what priorities and have everybody agree on 5 unique priorities for it not to be like a huge 20 long list of priorities in that cloud instance. So there was a lot of change involved into that. And it wasn't only about migrating everything, as Daniel says, like not garbage in, garbage out, just move over the data and just dump it into the cloud instance. We also need to ensure that these teams that are coming in are taking account of, we have heard how they're working, what they're using Jira for, and Confluence as well. and how they can adapt into the new schema of working into the new cloud instance. So there was a lot of change. There was a lot of stakeholder management and discussions and understanding how we can best standardize this and what's the approach for this, because this was a phased approach as well. We ran this out in 5 different phases of migrations, how we can bring all these teams together and coexist in a single instance. So that was a very fun, that was a great challenge to be involved with. I really loved that. And yeah, so was this because of not understanding the user access part of the system? I think Daniel can also share some examples there, but I can definitely say that it is the case sometimes that happens. You know, and just to share an experience, a couple of years ago, I was working with a company that was very security conscious. They had all these hoops for you to just access the instance. They had Atlassian access set up. They had all the the general pieces. All of it was figured out. SSO was in place, 2-factor authentication, all these kind of things. That was perfect. But then when we started off just a general current state workshop to understand where they were at that moment, we noticed that their permission scheme was very similar to the one that I shared, which any logged in user could just do anything, and they could view, delete issues, they could access whatever project and configure it. And that was just a huge red flag that we raised at that moment. And that was something that, once again, as you mentioned, there was no dedicated Jira admin in their case. So there wasn't something that was specifically tasked or assigned to work on these Atlassian products. Whereas there was just an IT folk that, amongst other hats, he had to wear the Jira admin hat, and he was doing the best that he could, right? So that was something that we were able to just come in and quickly educate them on the uses of permission schemes and roles, and reconfigure that quickly to ensure that it would align with what they were needing. So yeah, definitely it comes a lot with lack of awareness of what you can do with these tools.
Yeah, thanks, Miguel.
I think we're
No problem. And
past time, actually.
Yeah.
Thanks
So
you
we're
for
at
the
time.
engagement.
Yeah, and any further questions? I think we're approaching time right now, but if you have any further questions, once again, here are our emails. You can reach out. You can reach out to us as well via our website. Any closing remarks, Daniel?
No, I think it was great. Vasu, some of your questions were dead on. This is a topic that a lot of people are not super aware of, unless you work in an organization that has a lot of these, generally speaking, across the organization. But it definitely gets complex the later on in the journey you introduce these concepts. So I would just say, if you can, try and get your customers or your organization to start thinking about these things early on. It makes the process a lot simpler, cleaner, easier for everybody. But don't discard the change management aspects as well. I would say, just people's roles and the things they do day to day, and the change that this can possibly introduce to that is not to be underestimated. Change in any organization is hard to accept sometimes, and so take that into account as well when you're working on this kind of stuff, on governance in particular. It's very important.
Definitely, and we would be happy to hear you out. In case you have any further questions, you can just let us know. Once again, we're from Service Rocket. We got your back. And thank you all for joining today. So we'll see you out in our next webinar.